Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners to Big Little Small Talk. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I have Michael Metcalfe, commonly known as Mick, ASM, with me today, and he is a paramedic, member of the QAS, joined in 1991, I think, but we're going to tease all of those details out. Welcome to Big Little Small Talk, Mick.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me what ASM stands for?
It's Ambulance Service Medal, so it's part of the national award structure purely for people that work in the ambulance services around Australia.
What do you have to do to get an ASM?
It's a recognition of an achievement. It can be for a range of different things. My particular award was presented to me for, I've done a lot of work in industrial relations and employee relations space over the course of my career, and so that was recognition of that.
Yeah, right. So does that mean you got the workers through their 2.5% or you didn't get the workers through their 2.5%? Industrial relations is a tricky area.
Started out early as a local union delegate, ended up on the state executive of the union, then went into the management side of things, and then was responsible for probably 5 or 6 or 7 enterprise bargaining processes, some of which were arbitrated, some of which were agreed, and the coordination of the to and fro process of the sort of 9 to 12 months that it takes to get to the point where it goes out to vote and gets accepted.
And how did you find that? That's a really interesting position to be in. I always really admire the people who do that negotiation.
I love it. I love it as much, almost as much as I love being a paramedic. I just think it's good work. It's interesting to tease out what's really important to people. It's good to find out the things that would be nice to have versus the things that are really crucial, central to people's lives in the workplace, and from an organisational point of view as well as from a society point of view. And, if you can get to a point, and the majority of the processes we went through were agreed by both parties and voted in by the membership. And so you've got to take that as a bit of a successful thing.
Yeah. Do you think when you're in those negotiations, can you see the moment where a crack is opening up and you think, I reckon I'm going to be able to get this through, or they're not going to give on this, like that skill of negotiation?
Yeah. I think, fundamental to being successful in that space has been able to read people and to read what's posturing and what's the agreed negotiation message versus what's actually real. And so sometimes you see that just in the room when you're in amongst the process. More often than not, you get that in the conversations outside of the formal negotiations. But you use the formal negotiation process to test those things, try them out, push them to the extremes either way and find out which way it goes. When I changed from being a union delegate in that process to being on behalf of the organisation in that process some years later, you can even see where we're going to have to give on this one. Like, we're going to have to find a solution because this is too important for people, so they're not going to give on it. So how do we get around that, and what's the trade-off, or what's the offset to that, and how do we do that?
How did you learn those skills? Well, first of all, how did you learn the skills of negotiation?
I don't know. I think just I had a natural interest. I don't think anyone likes conflict, but I'm not overly upset by conflict if there's a structure to it. Like, if there's a point to it, then I'm quite okay with it. I can sit with it and do it. So I think that's probably one of the best things. I've got a pretty good memory, so I can remember conversations, I can remember agreements, I can remember policy and stuff. So that was a useful skill that I brought to the table, for either side that I was working with. And then I just got to work with a lot of very good people and experienced people. So you don't just go off as an organisation with your employees and negotiate. There's a government policy to be aware of. There's oversight by industrial relations people from central government. There's treasury oversight. There's a whole range of other things. And so over the course of 20 years of involvement in that space, I got to work with or watch or learn from a lot of very gifted people that, that was their bread and butter.
Can you remember the first time that you went into a room being on the other side?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was funny because, I had been one of the probably louder, more outspoken people on the union side. And then a couple of years later, I lob up on the other side, and 80% of the people that are on the negotiation side from the union side are the same people that I used to be there with. And so
Did you sense any hostility?
No, there was a lot of heckling and a lot of fun to be had, but I had built up a good reputation with those people for being reasonable and being honest and, you know, a person of my word. And so I think it actually aided the process over the next decade to have that background and to have that understanding and those relationships with people.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's go back to you training to be a paramedic. So when did people become a paramedic rather than an ambulance officer?
A little bit after I joined. So I joined in 1991, which was the government had undertaken a review, at least in 1990, maybe 1989 as well. There used to be 96 individual ambulance transport brigades in Queensland that were all self-funded. There was a central training school and there was a central board that provided some oversight across those committees and subcommittees across the state. But it was very much a case of where you had the capacity to make money, you had good equipment and lots of staff and a nice station to work from, and where you didn't, then you didn't. And, you know, and it was old cars and broken gear and no people. And it relied largely on people paying a subscription amount and then fundraising every fortnight, every month, and that's how they paid wages and that's how they bought cars. And so the government or governments of the day decided that they were going to set that up as the Queensland Ambulance Service, which took effect, I think, in July of 1991. And as part of that, they introduced a new training process, and the new training process was to do a 3-year associate diploma course where there would be, you know, a structured upfront vocational training program, at which time you become a qualified ambulance officer. And I think at about the time, you know, 94, thereabouts, when I became a qualified ambulance officer, there was a change of vernacular, you know, to be more consistent with the southern states, where they introduced paramedics. And then from there were advanced care paramedics and intensive care paramedics, which they are changed to critical care paramedics, but the structure's been largely the same since then. But a lot of changes in that time in, you know, scope and role and treatments and those sorts of things.
Can I ask you, what is the most annoying or cliched question that people ask you as a paramedic?
What's the worst job that you've been to?
All right, yes. I remember I asked that of a medical student once and he said, do you have to cut up many dead bodies? And so I wanted to get it out of the way pretty quickly. Yeah. So we didn't do any trauma porn. What motivated you, do you think? You know, is that the second question that people ask you? Yeah, maybe not quite as annoying.
No, it's not annoying. It came from left field. Both my older sisters were nurses. They had both started their working life working in banks. One worked for the Westpac Bank, one worked for the Commonwealth Bank. I started as a management cadet in a sawmill and didn't like it. I then got a job in a bank at the ANZ Bank. I went and did that, didn't like it. And so I left and tried a few different things, worked in pubs, ended up working at the television station here in Toowoomba. I moved across to Toowoomba and I got accepted into the last hospital-based nursing course at the PA hospital. But I got accepted in January and the course didn't start until July and I had some time to fill, sort of thing.
This is to go and do nursing?
To go and do nursing. Right. So I was just going to follow my sisters into that,
right,
just at a loss as to what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I got the job at the TV station. Then I stayed there. I didn't take up the offer to go nursing. Regional, I can't think what they called it now, but it's fundamentally where you shared broadcasts from stations and you cut jobs. Rationalisation, I think it was the name they gave to it at the time.
So the union rep, you should remember something like that.
I wasn't back then.
That's a dirty word.
But I lost my job and I went cutting posts and building fences and yards and stuff for 6 months, and then they advertised in the paper, you know, this was going to be the new way that you got into the job, centralised recruitment process with ambulance, and I put my name down for it and I was lucky enough to be one of the people that got a job.
Right, so it was kind of marrying like maybe that allied health and the nursing and something that sort of looked...
And something that was available at the time.
Yeah.
That wasn't quite so fatiguing as fencing.
That's true. I once met a lady at a party who said that she'd been living in the UK and that she was married to a paramedic, and he'd started to experiment with the drugs as you do. And I thought, as you do, is that what you do? Where this question is leading to is how do you deal with and respond in those stressful situations? And I want to talk, I guess, about the mental health load of being a paramedic.
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt that there is some substance abuse issues within ambulance services and the medical profession more broadly. I think that's well documented and accepted through research and experience. But we've been quite lucky with QAS. About 30 years ago, so I've been in the job for 31 years ago, they introduced a work unit called Priority 1, which was an employee assistance scheme. It was driven by a gentleman by the name of Paul Scully, who's long since retired. But Paul was very fixed on the requirement to provide people support in the workplace and then additional support specialist support from outside of the workplace to deal with the trauma. And I think at the time it was largely believed that just what we face on a day-to-day basis in our job and just the load of that trauma is what caused most of the issues. And I think what they found over the 30 years is it's issues with money, it's issues with relationships, it's family trauma and like childhood trauma. It's all the things that lead you to be resilient or not to be resilient that are probably more of a determinant as to whether you're affected by the trauma of what you see at work. And so if there's good support processes in place, you're not necessarily guaranteed to be affected. But then again, you might be because, the trauma's still there. The things that you see are still there. So we've had a very good process in place for the duration of my employment with QAS, and not every day is great. If you see a bad job, you see a bad job. I think I told you when we had a brief chat previously that, sometimes those jobs happen and you go home and you probably have an extra glass of wine that you don't need and you sit up later than you need to and you don't sleep as well. We've got excellent support processes, and I think preparedness to engage with those things is what probably gives you longevity in the job. Otherwise, people seem to deselect a little bit earlier. They just don't find a place that they want to be anymore.
What is the average time that people would stay as a paramedic?
I don't actually know anymore. I know it used to be quite long. So people used to join as a second job. It was very much people came from trade-based roles and then went into it, and then they would stay there and do another 30 years or so in the job. I think these days it's probably closer to somewhere between the 10 and the 20 mark. It's all pre-employment degree training now. Like there's some incredibly smart, well-educated people with 2 and even 3 degrees that come into the service. And so I'm not sure that they'll stay there.
That. So what did you say? It's
pre-employment degree training. So where it was vocational when I started, you got into the job and then you went away and did a course on job time. And so it was almost like an apprenticeship or that sort of setup. And then that transformed to a diploma, and then it transformed to pre-employment degree education.
So you've got to have a degree before you go. Yes,
yep,
right.
You've got to get into a university and get a degree. And then once you get a degree.
Does it matter which degree?
It's paramedicine.
Can I go in there with a philosophy degree?
No. It's got to be a degree in paramedicine, which was tricky to start with because there's only 2 universities in Queensland that offered it when I first started. Now it's quite broad across Queensland. There's lots of opportunity, and we employ people from interstate and from overseas and the like. But you've got to go and do that training, and then you come in and you do a 12-month process to consolidate your skills as opposed to just the learning sort of thing.
I just want to go back to the employment assistant program because I think most people listening who are working would and their work would have an employee assistance program. So you're saying that the ambulance was one of the first organisations to bring that in because of the nature of the work? Is that right? There was probably a
higher than wanted experience with people becoming traumatised, burnt out, depressed, those sorts of things. And it still exists today. It's not that the issue's resolved. I just think it's much better and much more appropriately managed these days than what it used to be pre-Priority 1 setup. And the foundation of that was that they set about training what they call peer supporters, so paramedics from within the workplace who they give some extra, psychological first aid training so that they can be a person that, paramedic A can speak to them after the job and just go through, or they'll follow them up in certain circumstances. If it's a recognised difficult job, then somebody reaches out. Otherwise, it's driven by the employees. And then there were always some central counsellors and external counsellors available to provide more specific advanced psychological care for those people. And it's grown over the years so that there's now regional counsellors employed in each region across the state, as well as a larger number of external counsellors to provide that specialist care where it's required.
Do you know whether your EAP is available to family of the paramedics?
It is direct family. It's available to spouses and children and that sort of thing. It's available.
Yeah, interesting. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM and we're talking to Mick Metcalfe, what is your official title?
I'm a senior critical care paramedic.
Okay, there it is, folks, senior critical care paramedic. And yes, that's right. So you've worked in all different areas and you're sort of talking about the EAP available for paramedics. And we touched on it before a little bit about how do you personally deal with stressful situations when you arrive at a job and you're assessing what needs to be done? And are you getting better at that or different? Has your scope of practice
I think you get
changed?
much better with time. So it's all very exciting and a little bit addictive when you first start in the job and driving fast and lights and sirens, and the drama of it is quite addictive. Like probably the first 10 years of my career, that's what I really enjoyed. And then it becomes a bit stale and that's sort of not enough by itself. And then I think as you grow through life and you have relationships and you have children and you deal with your own difficulties and you see more people going through that, then you just get a broader sense of what people require and what you require yourself to deal with that. And I became aware of a thing called mindfulness about 10 years ago. Quite self-reflective. I like to be honest with myself about jobs and how they've gone. So I sit down and go through each job after I've done it and just think, what would I have done differently? I don't tend to beat myself up about those things. I think if you've turned up in the right frame of mind and you've done your very best on a particular job, that's what keeps me safe in my mental health. Like as long as I feel like I've done the best that I can do, I'm pretty comfortable. Like it doesn't mean that you don't see sad things. Like not everyone can be saved. People will die either, through trauma, through age, through medical difficulty, at their own hand, through suicide. And those things are always difficult to see and to share that experience with people. But if you've done your best and you're well prepared and you've been able to assist the family and the people that are left behind, or even the patient themselves, if you're able to successfully treat them and achieve what you set out to achieve, people still require support through that, because it's, there's a saying within the health sphere and an ambulance in particular that most of the people we meet, most people that call on 000 are experiencing the worst day of their life. And it's just a day for us, but it's their worst day of their life. And I think if you go in with that mindset and you try and treat it as the worst day of their life and you be respectful and honest with them and you don't underplay or overplay things, you just let them know what your informed opinion is of what's happening and what there is to do about it, and whether we can treat that here or whether we need to get them to a specific hospital or how that's going to work, and then some information on the likely path to follow in the broader health system, then I think all of those things make it a better experience for the patient and their family, and that makes it a better experience for you to deal with individually as a clinician.
How do you go though, Mick? Like you see people, particularly if it's a very tragic circumstance, and people can't hear you. They can't hear what you're saying because they're just too traumatised.
Yep, that does happen. That happens frequently. And sometimes it's just about a little bit more time, and it can be as little as 5 or 10 minutes, or sometimes it's changing the message, or sometimes it's getting your partner to have the conversation. So I'm pretty efficient at building rapport with people quite quickly, but it doesn't work all the time. And sometimes I'm just not the person that the target audience wants to hear from. Sometimes they want to hear from somebody different. But similarly, a little older now and I'm nice and grey and
less threatening, you reckon?
Well, I think you just get that old man look about you. And so lots of the crews will call me out, particularly if they've got dementia patients or elderly people that are feeling a bit aggrieved with what's being forced on them for their own good, and they'll get me out to have the exact same conversation that they've had, but it's in slightly different language, in a slightly different voice, in a slightly different way, and it can be successful in those cases. So you've got to accept you can't be everything for everyone all the time, and you've just got to own that and then find another solution in those cases.
Living and working in a community for 30 years, how do you get on seeing people that you've been to a job for, or, they probably don't remember you, but you would remember them? Is that...
You do. You see a lot of people that you've treated, or you've treated someone in their family over the course of time. For the most part, it's a nod or a wave or a second look, like they see you out of uniform and they can't quite place where they know you from. Then other times you treat people that you know very well, that you've already got well-established relationships with, or you make relationships out of meeting people through the job because of what you've been able to provide for them, and it has a significant impact on their life. And so, there's an attachment from that point forward. It's rare, but it's also a pretty special experience when you get to have that as part of your working life. So.
How do you go, particularly with the changing face in Toowoomba, particularly with the migrant communities and stuff? Is that...
It's been tricky at times. I think it's quite nice that this town and administrations that have been responsible in this town have contributed to settling people from difficult parts of the world in a safer environment. But when you get a new group of people through and they don't always have language support, and that can be quite tricky. When the Kurdish Kurmanji community first started coming here, we couldn't even get interpreter services reliably on the phone, whereas at this point now, they've all got teenage children who have been speaking English for 5 years, and so you get local interpretation in most cases within the family unit. So those things are a lot easier. It's always important, when there's a new group in a community, then it takes some time to learn something about their community, find out something about their customs, understand how they're going to react, understand what their language is, understand what their behaviours are, so that you can then, do a proper assessment and provide proper treatment and advice to them.
You said before about people asking you what's the worst job you've ever been to. What's the best job? Have you ever delivered a baby or anything like that?
I have, but I find it horrifying. I'd love every woman to have their baby in a hospital and for me not to be there. So, no, I've done quite a few, but I don't find it enjoyable.
Right.
It's a lovely experience when it's done, but I'm a boy and it's still foreign to me, and so I find it stressful. I'd much rather go to trauma and stuff like that every day than do that.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, good job. I don't have a favourite job. I think the majority of our work effort is about improving people's experience on a day and hopefully making them more comfortable, improving their morbidity in the experience as opposed to saving their life. But, there's a few dozen occasions that I can think across in my career where you think, I made a difference today,
What sort of thing? Like, what do you think?
If snake bites, anaphylaxis, trauma, people in cardiac arrest that you get back, where if you weren't there, then they would be dead,
right.
And then they would be lost. And so it's not that
That's
only I could do it.
Significant difference in their life.
And it's not that only I could do it, but it's a cool part of our job that you get to do that on a semi-regular basis sort of thing.
Do you always work with the same person or do you get moved around and have different... I would imagine that relationship between you and your partner would be fairly critical.
It's changed a bit over the years. So when we first started, we had a very team-based roster process. So you work with the same sort of half dozen or so people all the time, and the organisation is just too big now. Like when I first joined the organisation, there was 1,100 employees, and now there's 6,500. So, it's a very different beast to what it used to be. Now, if you take Toowoomba as an example, there's 4 stations, if you include Toowoomba and Highfields. The majority of those run 24 hours. Like in Toowoomba, there's 3 different rosters on that. There's a couple at Fairview and there's another one over at Drayton. And so people roll through and you'll do a section of time with the same person, but then someone will go on leave and you come back on a different line. And so there's a bit of a rotation that happens. I work in a pod car, like the little rapid response car, by myself principally, unless I'm mentoring someone or I've got someone, with me for a while. And so we get to work with everyone. Like you drop in on jobs, you provide assistance, you're the go-to if they need, another approach or some advanced intervention or those sorts of things. So it's a cool job that I've got now where you get to just dabble in a broader pool than if you just get sent out on your job sort of thing.
Mick, do you find when you see new people coming into the service, can you tell almost straight away whether they're going to last or not?
Oh, you can tell if they're going to struggle. Not necessarily whether they're going to last, because some people are very tenacious and just do what it needs to be done to get through. But you see, and it almost tends to go in waves sort of thing. Like, there was a period a few years back where some of the people that came in just didn't seem to be resilient enough as a group sort of thing. And a lot of those people either moved station very quickly or changed their mind about the job very quickly. I've got to say the last 4 years, the people I've seen come through are excellent. Like they're young and you look at them and you think, this is a big, bad world. Some of the things we see in this job, and they are happy to put their hand up. They're happy to ask for help. They're happy to still have a go. They're really quite resilient. I came back to Toowoomba about 4.5 years ago, and some of the people that were just sort of starting at that stage, you look at them now and they're starting to dip their toe into some supervisory roles and some other things. And so I think they've done quite well. So the selection processes are normally quite good. I think COVID just changed that process for a while with the not being able to do face-to-face and the like. And so there was a little bit of a wobble for a while. But
well, I wanted to ask you about that because earlier you said if there's the, childhood trauma and things that then just resurfaces. So how much of the selection process is finding out about things like that? A, mentally, and B, how much physical requirement is there?
There's a few different processes. So there's certain diseases you just can't have and be there either because it affects your capacity to have a commercial licence or the like. So there's some limitations there. There's a physical assessment process that needs to take place to make sure that you're going to be fundamentally able to undertake. It's actually quite a strenuous job. There's a lot of lifting. There's a lot of postural issues, a lot of getting people up off the ground and heavy gear to carry.
It's ongoing, the physical requirement?
Oh, no, the physical requirement's not. It's only at entry, but it's really hard to stay in the job and not get injured if you don't maintain it. So, and I think that's something that people do better these days than when I first started. When I first started, the old guys that are, the age I am now, had quite a lot of weight on and weren't that fit sort of thing. I think there's a lot more focus now on people sort of maintaining a good state of physical health so that they can, withstand the pressures of the job. Through the recruitment process, there's a couple of bits. There's some questionnaires you do to pick out, I guess, the outliers if there's significant psychological warning signs. And then there's psychologist engagement through the interview process and stuff to do an assessment, again, to look for the outliers, to say, this is what we'd expect a normal person to answer when we do these questions.
Normal,
and if they're not, then they do a little bit more digging just to sort of see how that goes. So like in a lot of other industries, that particular area of expertise has gotten much better over the 33 years that I've been here.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me today on Big Little Small Talk. It's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Mick Metcalfe, who is a paramedic. He's a senior clinical paramedic. That's right. Now, when you were telling me about your work, I was thinking you're almost kind of like midwives are to people. You're these people that sort of like these angels that come and you sort of not given the recognition that you deserve, but you're this angel that comes in an hour of trauma and need for someone, and then you go away again and people probably don't have a chance to thank you. And you said about not particularly liking being a midwife and giving birth to children. But I wanted to ask you about your own children, and because you have an interesting story to tell me about sort of having an equal share of work. You're married to a psychologist. You get a free bit of advice. You tell me whether you want it or not, which is handy for you. So, Mick, you went to 17 schools, I believe, yourself as a young person, and you said that you thought you don't know whether your parents were naive or whether they just didn't pay their bills. But what did you mean by that?
Oh, I don't know why you would move as often as what they did. Like I went to 15 primary schools and I went to 2 high schools. So we were always on the move, and sometimes you'd be at a school for 6 weeks and then you'd be, off to a new town sort of thing. And so I was a very shy, introverted kid. And I think it was almost to the point where you thought, well, I'm not going to rush to make friends because I don't know how long I'm going to be here sort of thing. And so I don't know whether they were gypsies at heart or they never really wanted to talk about it.
You never found out the reason why?
No, I did.
Were they evasive about it when you asked them about it later in life?
Yeah, they were. My mother and my natural father got divorced when I was 4, and my mother remarried soon after that. And her and my stepfather worked together in various things. He was a builder at one stage. They had a company, and but they always yearned for something else. Like they were always looking for something else or for something better or the like. And I just got the sense that it wasn't always necessarily rooted in realism. I'm a bit more realistic in the way I approach my life. And then they divorced after about 20 years, and I don't have contact with my stepfather anymore, and my mother's since passed. But I spoke to her a lot about my father and the circumstances of the divorce in my early life, and then the reasons why our life was as it was, and she was always very resistant to offering up anything. You know, it was always
and you still
hush,
don't know the answer to that?
No.
Right. Do you think in some ways all of that moving built your resilience?
I think it did. I had to make a purposeful effort to get a bit more out there in year 12, and after year 12 I had to do a presentation in year 11, and I stood on the stage and froze and couldn't speak, and I thought this is going to be a bit tricky getting through life when you can't do that. So I sort of, went out of my way. I probably swung too far for a couple of years. I was probably a bit too flamboyant for a couple of years, and I'd like to think I sort of came back to a happy medium. But it's like, I just found it's like everything. Like it takes practice. Like if you don't put yourself out there, then it's terrifying every time you do it. And if you do it 100 times, it's far less terrifying. If you do it 200 times, it's almost, a nothing. And so I learned early in life that you can just take on things that are difficult. And if you just try and you reflect honestly with yourself about, what your concerns are, then it helps. I certainly think, marrying Lani was a useful thing in my development as a person. She sort of helped guide some of those conversations that I got to have with myself later on. And I think that was useful for me. So I think, lots of things helped, but it set up a resilience in me that I know that you can do difficult things and you can get through them. But it also set up a reluctance in me to move around too much. So,
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, do you think that you're almost, and would Lani say you're too stable?
I don't know if she'd say I'm too stable, because she's a little bit the same. We like stability. I worked in Brisbane for the best part of sort of 10 years, and I commuted for the majority of that because we liked where we lived here. This is where we wanted to raise our kids. It's a nice place. As much as I enjoyed the work I was doing in Brisbane, we did live in Brisbane for 6 years, but we moved back here again, and we just decided this was the place to be. At times when we've talked about doing other things, she's just as resistant to change as what I am. So we're both pretty settled.
Yeah, interesting.
Settled group.
And you are a father, of course, and having so much medical knowledge. Tell me about your Irish twin sons.
Our Irish twins. So we were not able to conceive. We had a lot of miscarriages and a lot of difficulties trying to have babies. I've got an older daughter, Gabby, who turns 30 this year, from a previous marriage. And then we got together, Lani and I got together, and we tried to have kids, and we couldn't have kids. And so we went, through the process of saying, well, if that's the way it is, then you're not meant to have kids. And then when that becomes real, you think, oh, we'll just try the first step, and then we'll try the second step. And then in the end, we went, the full-blown IVF process, and we did that up here. And part of the recommendation of one of our doctors was you need a bit of a quieter life than what you've got now. So that was the trigger for us to come back to Toowoomba. And then we were lucky enough to, get some eggs, and we had 5 eggs that were successfully removed and able to be used. And our joke was that one went in the freezer and one went in the oven. So we had Jake initially in 2007, and then Toby came out of the freezer and we had him in 2009. But for 5 days they were twins. They were together. They're just 14 months apart in age now. So.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? So they really are twins, or
yeah, they really
were just
are
fertilised? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know what the scientific view of it is.
That's right.
That's why we just call them our Irish twins. So.
Yeah. I thought Irish twins were
children that are born in the same year. When you have one born in, say, the January and one born in the December, that was my... I get accused of being an Irish mother, which is favouring your sons. Well, I've only got sons, but mothers who favour their sons over their daughters, that's Irish mother. Tell me what it's like to be a man when your wife's going through IVF. Like, do you have a sense of helplessness or...
It certainly takes the romance out of it.
Yes,
so,
well, all of those needles.
The whole process,
hormone.
And Lani's very needlephobic, so the work that went on, that she had to go through for me to do that, and then the impact that it has on women when they've got to take all the extra drugs and hormones, and you see their weight change and you see their moods change and you see the devastation when it doesn't work. So we were very, very happy when we had Jake in the first instance, sort of thing, and he was reasonably low key. He had a few health issues around 6 months, which I didn't believe. Lani, she rang me at work one day to say that he wasn't breathing properly, and I said, "Oh, are you sure?" And then she rang me from St Vincent's Hospital, and he had some respiratory issues, and he kept not breathing for about 36 hours. I learnt never to doubt her word thereafter.
Is that because you think you've seen so much in your working career that you know not to panic?
Oh, I think you almost set out not to. So, when the boys break an arm or something and they get Panadol and a full inspection by me before we take them to a hospital to get it checked, sort of thing. So I can be a bit harsh. Like, they all know, if you've not had a glass of water and 2 Panadol, then don't ask Dad. So, because that's the answer to most ailments in this life. So,
well, I use the philosophy, if it wasn't broken or bleeding, well, I didn't want to know about it, really. Yeah. So what about your other boy? He had a little bit of issues with his heart.
He did.
Well.
Yeah, it was a bit tricky with Toe. So they were both born at 5:30 on a Thursday afternoon by caesarean, so it's very easy to track their birth date. And he had an uneventful, first 24 hours, but by, Friday he was struggling to feed a bit, and Lani raised some concerns and was sort of patted on the head as the anxious mother and, we know best, which was a bit unfortunate. And then I had gone home at 7 o'clock on Friday night. He didn't seem too bad, but he was a little bit struggling to latch onto the boob. And then she called me and she said, there's something wrong, he's not well. I went back up. I happened to meet a nurse there who I worked with at Cunnamulla for 8 or 9 months, and she had moved to Toowoomba and was working at the hospital at the time. And so she took a bit more notice of us and sort of took him into special care for the night, and kept an eye on him, and they were able to feed him through a bottle and do a few things. But by the next morning, it was very apparent that he wasn't well. And so the on-call obstetrician came up and said, no, he's very, very unwell. And we went to Brisbane that evening, and we found out that he had a coarctation to his aorta, which means it was very narrowed. And as his fetal circulation was closing, he was not getting oxygen, to his brain and around his body and the like. And he had some other issues structural issues in his heart that needed to be resolved. And so that was a life-changing moment at 3 days of age for us, and lots of navel-gazing and thinking about how life was going to be from that point forward. But he had open heart surgery and it was great, and then it leaked, so he had open heart surgery again 3 months later. But he wasn't sick that time, so that was a much better experience the second time. And then 7 million doctors, appointments since to follow up. But he's excellent. He's healthy. He's normal. He's energetic. He's a beautiful kid. So in the end, it's all worked out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think you called him your Harlequin baby, didn't you? What did that mean?
His circulation was so shut down on the Saturday morning at the hospital that we've got a photo, and it's a terrible photo to look at, but I just keep it to remind myself every now and again. But he was dusky blue down one side and quite pale on the other side. So it was,
Do you think having the amount of medical knowledge that you had, were you catastrophising and thinking, I know where this is going to go, I know how this is?
No, I was pretty sure where it was going to go, and it was all going bad. I think some of the medical staff thought we were catastrophising. I think, there was a little bit of stay in your lane, like we know what we're doing. And then we got to Brisbane and this amazing doctor, Elizabeth.
Oregon.
Excuse me.
Very,
still,
taking it to a very...
Still fresh, it's only 16 years. So, and she said, he's going to die. Like, we don't think there's anything we can do. So go and make some plans, sort of thing. And then they came up with the resolution. So it was every bit as bad as we thought it was going to be. And I just will be forever in debt for the people that have cared for him since then.
To me, hearing that story, Mick, it's kind of like all those people that I guess are forever in debt to you for the stuff that you've done for them as well.
Oh, that's right.
It's a circular world.
We know how important it was for us, for the people that were honest, supportive, respectful, engaged with us. It gives you a really good format for how to take your own service forward, sort of thing. So I
wanted to talk to you quickly before we run out of time about how you mentioned to me that your scope of practice, or how people are living. You've seen people become much more isolated in the community. Tell me about that.
Yeah, look, it's really important to us. We live in Highfields, and we chose Highfields when we came back to Toowoomba specifically because at the time it had about 5,500 people. The schools were quite small, and we wanted our kids to grow up in a community where people knew them and they knew who those people were. And we did things like, I joined the PNF at the school as a president or the secretary of the rugby club and help out with the league club and help out at school, take the ambulance for a visit, do all those bits and bobs that parents do to make sure that the kids were known and they were known in the community and that we were known in the community. People knew who you were and they knew that their kids would be safe to go to your house and all those sorts of things. I still think that that's vitally important to this day. And the boys are 16 and 17 now. They probably know more people in town than we do now, but I still think that's wonderful. And they've gotten jobs out of those relationships and they get support out of those relationships. And when they have a bust up with their girlfriend, they've got other teenagers that they can go to who are nice teenagers who don't tell them it's the end of the world and they need to take drugs and rebel to get over it. They tell them it's okay to be sad and do those things. But so many of the people that we see in work now just don't have that. There is, through domestic violence, through generational substance abuse, through unemployment, through a range of different factors, people can live in the same town as their family and just have no contact with their family. They can be from another state and end up here through some placement program and they've got absolutely no one. And when you go to those people, and a lot of those people we go to on a regular basis, and you can see just this long-term downward spiral until you stop going to them, sort of thing. And you think, it bothers me that there's such a breakdown in family units and in community these days. Like, I think that's the answer to everything. The old saying that we talked about, it takes a village to raise a child, is just based on that. Like, you can't do it all yourself. Parents can't do it all. Your kids don't want to listen to you half the time. Like, they need other adults. They need other frames of reference to measure you up against, to see whether you're worth trusting and the like. And I think I've seen the value of that in my kids' upbringing. And then you see these other, we go to 14-year-olds that are addicted to multiple different drugs, that are on their second pregnancy, that have just assaulted their mother or their mother's assaulted them, in a breakdown of the family unit in an acute sense. And you just think, how do these people get there? Like, how do you get out of it?
Yeah, how do you get out of it? That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you have any, not a panacea, but do you have any idea how do you intervene? How do governments intervene?
Oh, look, the way we intervene in the immediate sense is to make people safe, is to deal with what's happening in the acute moment. There's been some significant improvements in the last couple of years with respect to mental health co-responders and mental health consult lines that we've got, that run pretty much all the time out of Brisbane, so that you can talk with somebody who's got access to their mental health records, but also is, much more proficient in that space than what I am as a paramedic, to offer some advice. I just think it's not all just about drop-in centres and support groups, because none of them operate at 2:00 in the morning. Like, the majority of our mental health calls happen from 4:00 in the afternoon through till midnight. The majority of the suicides or suicide attempts happen in the evening and early hours, when people are feeling isolated at a natural low. They don't have a house to be in when it's cold or it's wet. They don't have food and they're hungry. Like, I think all those things, just sort of cascade together to make people more isolated. So I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I think a reliance on just pushing it out to community to deal with when community runs from 8 till 5 in its primacy and mental health doesn't, is a failed process. And I think it needs to be a bit different to that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You'd just be, I guess you see the best and the worst of the way that people live, even the standard of going into people's homes and seeing how they live. Yeah.
You see some horrific things in it, but then you see some blissfully happy children and families living like that, and it's not my way to live. Like, I'm a bit OCD, but I don't think it's the measure of happipiness or safety, because you see a lot of different things, and I've been into a lot of very nice houses where there's some very unpleasant dynamics, going by. But the one thing that makes me feel better about a circumstance is when you see a close family unit or close support networks versus people in isolation. And I think that's the worst of it. And we see some horrendous things. Like it's very unpleasant, some of the things that we see. But equally, we see loving, supporting partners and parents and children, on a daily basis. And there's a fair bit of balance in our life.
The roundabouts, right. Now, I, as usual, have run out of time. So any love for the Royals at all? Do you have a favourite Royal?
Well, I'm not a big Royalist, but I know that you were going to ask this question. So I did put some thought into it. I was actually... Prince Harry got me onto the Royals a few years ago in his naughty stage. Pre-Meghan, when he was a bit of fun, he was always in trouble with the media or dressed up the wrong party or making the wrong signal or, doing whatever. I thought he brought a bit of life back to the royal family. I don't think Meghan's been good for him or his appearance. And in actual fact, if you look at the way Prince William has responded over the last 5 years during all the trauma and all the carry-on that's gone on, I think he's just been a good, stoic example of leadership. Like he's sort of his turn to shine at the moment. But yeah, Harry and his party days was a bit of fun.
Right, so you've got to bet each way there with the two boys. Fair enough. And Mick, I would imagine you are a dancing man. What's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
I'm not a great dancing man. If I have, it generally means I've had one beer too many. But True Companion by Mark Cohn. It was our wedding song. So,
oh, how beautiful. And just having Valentine's Day just gone by, that's...
Well, we're not a Valentine's Day couple. We never have been.
But it is
we take birthdays and Christmases very seriously. And for our anniversary, we just had our 20th anniversary last month. I got the words to that song put up on a wall hanging for Lani, like on a framed wall hanging to put up in our bedroom. So, yeah.
Well, Mick, you have been a wonderful person to interview and hear about your work. As I say, you're a bit like angels that come in the night, and we've all got you to be thankful for. So, thank you for the work that you've done, and thank you for telling us about it today.
Thanks for having me along. Much appreciated.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.